The 2023 Nissan Z. Is it an evolution or is it a revolution? If this were a fully rounded review of the new 2023 Nissan Z, I could talk about what a great car it is on the road. I could tell you about some of the design details that evoke every generation of Nissan Z up to this point and celebrate some of their most beautiful features, but it's not that. It's a track review. So I have to use a word that I'm really not very excited to use about this new Nissan Z, and that word is disappointing. Our test Nissan Z is a pre-production model, but it reflects what the performance package of the Z is going to look like once it hits showrooms. It's got a set of 19-inch wheels wrapped in 255 40/19 tires in the front and 275 35/19 tires in the rear. This model carrying a set of 240 treadwear Bridgestones. It's also got some other great performance touches, like a set of performance brakes featuring larger front calipers, a real mechanical limited slip differential, and a rev matching system that works very, very well to match revs on downshifts, meaning if you don't want to, you don't have to heel and toe. Initial impressions of the car on track, up to about 80% of its potential, are pretty good. Steering is a little bit light, but it's got good feedback, meaning you know exactly what those front tires are doing, and the sight lines are excellent, meaning that next apex is exactly where you're looking for it, and you can place all four corners of that car right where you want them. The engine's very flexible. It produces a lot of torque, even down below 2,000 RPM. But when you start pushing it a little bit harder is when things start to break down a little bit. The car becomes very nervous, very touchy to drive out on the edge. It just doesn't feel as stable and as locked down as a car in this class should really be. First, let's talk about something this chassis does very, very well, and that's trail braking into slower, deeper corners. When you initiate hard braking and then start to track down towards that apex, bleeding off just the amount of brake that you need to maintain cornering force, this car does that very well and very intuitively. Even when there's ABS intervention, it really hunts for that apex in slower corners. Now in medium speed or faster corners, the entries can be a little more dicey. So I think one of the biggest issues here is the fact that this chassis is severely undersprung, meaning there's a lot of roll, there's a lot of pitch, there's a lot of general softness, and that means weight transfer takes its sweet time, and these tires take a while to load, whether they're entering a corner, mid-corner, or exiting a corner. Now you combine that with a throttle that is much more aggressive than that chassis actually likes. There's a very logarithmic quality to the throttle and to the power delivery, meaning the last little bit of throttle travel produces a lot of excitement from that twin-turbo 3-liter engine. So what happens is you have to sort of change your driving style a bit, that when you're exiting a corner, you've got those rear tires loaded, you've waited a while for that grip to develop in the rear. Because that chassis takes a while to take a final set, now you're adding power trying to exit that corner while you're also balancing max load on those rear tires, and all of a sudden you get a lot of throttle, a lot of power, and it's very easy for those rear tires to break away, particularly in lower to medium speed corners where you have more torque available from the gear reduction of those lower gears. Now, you may think this is all driver. This is just one person that didn't make a good connection with this car. But we actually have some data that backs up some of our subjective feeling. Now, I want to bring up, for the sake of comparison, our best lap in the Toyota Supra, which, by the numbers, has about 13 less rated horsepower than the Z. So we can see the Z car in blue and the Supra in red. These are the speed traces. Let's focus in on this corner right here, which is third into fourth gear, pulling to the fastest part of the track. And we can really see that it just cannot keep up in a straight line with the Supra. It's actually exiting this corner at a very similar speed than the Supra, just a little bit slower. But as soon as you get that throttle down, the Supra just drives right away from it. So I don't know where those 400 horsepower are hiding, but they are definitely hiding somewhere. Best lap time for the Z was 1 minute 23.44 seconds. Best lap time for the Supra, 1 minute 19.59 seconds. Yes, almost 4 full seconds faster than the Z. So what does the Z compare to most directly on track? Well, that would be the automatic version of the 2022 Subaru BRZ that we tested at 1 minute 23.16 seconds. When you look at this speed trace, they look almost identical. If you look at how these cars are pulling out of corners, let's zoom in right here to the slowest corner on the track. This is the hairpin corner right here. It is turn 7 at the firm. Minimum speed for both cars, very similar. Z in blue, BRZ in red. The acceleration out of that corner is identical, and that's for a 400 horsepower Z versus a 220 something horsepower BRZ. So the thrust that should be there with 400 horsepower just does not seem to be available. Let's look at another area where we can really see a difference in these two cars, and that is in the entry to the fast right-hand turn 4 at the firm. Now, this is a very quick entry. It's basically a right-hand flick that has a lot of cornering towards the latter part of the corner, but you can see how much more we had to slow down in the Z to negotiate the entry to this corner. Our minimum entry speed is almost 4 miles an hour slower in the Z than it was in the BRZ. And that's that imprecision we've talked about, that just sort of indecisiveness, the nervousness of this car on track when you're not really planting those front wheels with the brakes. Going into higher speed and even medium speed corners that don't require a lot of braking, there's a lot of nervousness there. After we looked at the data, we were left with a lot of questions about the horsepower numbers of the Z. So we strapped it down to a dyno. Assuming a 15% drivetrain loss, all the horsepower that Nissan says is present, but the acceleration sure doesn't seem to match those numbers. Before we asked, is this Z evolutionary or revolutionary? And I think now it's clear that this new Z draws heavily on the DNA of both the 350Z and the 370Z, so it's very fair to call it evolutionary. Now, those were both cars that also had very similar problems coming out of the factory. The good news is those were problems that were largely solved by the aftermarket. And the question now is, will the aftermarket embrace the new Z the same way it embraced previous Zs? There's great bones here. The car weighs less than 3,300 pounds. It's got decent balance. It's a good platform because it's a proven platform. And time will tell whether the aftermarket can turn this into a true track machine. What do you think about the new 2023 Nissan Z? Let us know down in the comments. While you're down there, you can also hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and visit us online at grassrootsmotorsports.com. We'll see you again next time.
Support brands that support Grassroots Motorsports. Get your chemical solutions from CRC Industries. Visit crcindustries.com to learn more.